Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Sustainable Commodities podcast, a podcast to help people navigate the ever-changing world of sustainability and sustainable commodities. I'm Barnaby Patchett, MD of 199 Agency, a marketing agency working in sustainable commodities. And with me...
Hi, I'm Judith Murdoch from Murdoch Associates.
And in this episode, we're delighted to welcome a very special guest, Rob Daykin, Managing Director at Daykin Partnership Limited. Rob is an expert in animal feed and livestock farming, and continuing the theme of this series, we'll be talking about animal feed and dairy and how these industries will be impacted by upcoming deforestation legislation like EUDR and UKDD.
So, Rob, before we dig into the legislation, which I think the three of us have been chatting and saying how much is actually known, I want to go back to the basics. And when we first met, I was so fascinated about what is actually in animal feed. Can you just tell us what is in animal feed? And I know you specialise in dairy, but a general view would also be great.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Barnaby. Thanks, Judith. It's great to be here now, to be invited onto this. Well, where do we start in terms of what's in animal feed? And, really, if we take it back to the basics and we look at the, cereal content, we'll have soy content, we'll have palm content, we'll have red meal content, we'll have oats, but there'll also be, a diet is made up of multiple things, providing protein, providing energy, providing fibre, providing amino acids, providing minerals. So there's your basic makeup of an animal's diet. And it's...
Yeah.
Sorry, go on, Judith.
No, I was just going to say, so why would you use certain things? I mean, why would you use palm oil and say... soya? What are you trying, or rape, for an example? What are you trying to get out of those commodities in feed?
Different things for all three of the different things you've mentioned there. Palm oil would be used on, certainly in dairy, palm kernel would be the biggest use. There would be some palm oil used in protected fats from certain, to create certain amounts of energy within the diet. You would use soy for protein, but also for its amino acid profile. You would also use rape for protein, and all three of them provide an amount of energy as well. But you would have other commodities come in there for energy, such as maize, such as wheat, such as barley. And often a diet's made up on what would be called, the compound feed will be made up on what's called least cost formulation. So the formulation program would pick commodities depending on what their cost is and what their analysis is, and it would fit them into the diet or fit them out of the diet depending on where the cost is. If you then add parameters to what you want that diet to provide in terms of energy, of protein, then you can override those least cost parts of the diet. So there are probably 20 or 30 different ingredients from waste products that come out of the brewing industry, or such as brewers' grains. You'll have distillers, you will have all sorts of other confectionery byproducts that go into animal feeds. A lot of them are byproducts of other industries. So particularly if you look at soya, we use the expeller. So the expeller comes after the oil's been crushed out of the soy for its other uses. So we're using the expeller. So in some ways, I would see the feed industry as an essential part of tidying up the whole chain. Mm-hmm. So once the components have been taken out for human food consumption, the expeller then comes back into the animal feed industry. And that then follows the circle back into the food chain.
Yeah. So you in terms of the makeup of it, I guess it's the same as with human feed in terms of what you're trying to do. You're trying to create a balanced diet for a specific purpose within the Yeah, within the makeup of that. And that's why these different ones are used.
Yeah, and that's tailored to what you're looking for in terms of production. I mean, the range of yields in dairy cattle across the UK will go from, some farms at 4,000 litres on to, the high-performing farms at 13,000 litres. So you require very different diets and different components depending on where you are in terms of the yield you're expecting. But you've also got to take into account that cow has to maintain a body weight, and she's also got to feed a growing calf.
So that's why they need the fats and the protein and all those other things that come from the palm oil and the soya and all of the other commodities. And it's finding the right blend of them to reach those goals.
The right blend at the right price.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, plenty of farmers.
Yeah. I think one of the things that we've talked about in the past as well is that at one point the market wanted to get away from soya, particularly in dairy herds. There's been some leading retailers that have wanted to get out of soya. But what are the alternatives if you wanted to remove, say, soya or palm oil? Because, I mean, again, our PK, the PK expeller, are there alternatives?
I think what we probably need to do is to split it. If we stick with dairy, we need to split it between two groups of dairy. I think we need to split it between conventional dairy and organic dairy. And if we look at the organic dairy to start with, it's a much smaller pool of ingredients, a much smaller pool of raw materials. So if we look at soya as a beginning, soya is really important to us in organic, and it comes from different parts of the world to where conventional soya would come from. So in a lot of ways, it's not affected by deforestation. With very little coming out of Brazil, you've got soy comes out of Africa, out of Europe, out of China and India, and there's always you've always got to take into account there's a geopolitical part to organic soy, because it's there's a lot of families involved in producing that because it's much smaller scale. So soy is really important for lots of ways. It provides really good quality, high quality proteins, but it also provides us with amino acids, lysine and methionine, which are really important as building blocks, and essential in organic poultry, because their diets are formed in ruminants. We formulate to protein and energy, whereas in poultry they formulate to lysine and methionine. So often you'll see poultry diets that are a lot higher concentration in soya, because they're searching for lysine and methionine from that soya, which they can't get synthetically, which you can do conventionally. Mm-hmm. I hope that sort of covers.
So what would you use instead of it in terms of, is there a direct swap?
Certainly in organic, there is no direct swap.
Okay.
For soya, on a like-for-like basis, we can make up the numbers. Mm-hmm. The protein numbers and the energy numbers can be made up, but there's no direct swap and there's no like-for-like in terms of quality. In conventional agriculture, there are synthetic amino acids. There are more options, and rape is used far more in conventional agriculture. It's UK grown, UK crushed, European grown, European crushed. So that conventional agriculture, definitely far more alternatives to replace soya than what we would have done in organic.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things been watching is the amount of flooding that's been going on, obviously here in the UK, and farmers have not been able to either plant crops or get onto the land. Do you see, like the availability of, say, rapeseed? We won't go into this too much, but do you see, like with Ukraine and the pressures on climate change, that actually the use of rape could come under pressure? Because that could be, people think, oh yeah, I don't want to be Obviously our theme is talking about the EU due diligence in the UK, and, some people could be saying, well, I'll tell you what, I'll just get away from these commodities that fall into this. I'll use something else. And that's definitely the picture that we've had in food. So if there was a move over to rapeseed, do you think the market would cope with that, or that there's availability? And
I think that's a really interesting question, because and I think this is probably a whole another debate, but the SFI, what's just come into place within the UK, it's going to have a massive impact, I think, on rape acreages, because since the neonicotinoids ban, rape has declined as a crop anyway, and I think the SFI will take more acres of rape out of that. But that's a story for another day, and a whole conversation on its own. But I'm intrigued in when you bring up the weather, Judith, because I wrote the stats down before we came on to this, and the October to March rainfall period for the UK is the wettest on record since, I think, 1886. We've had 1,695 millimetres of rain. So is that part of this conversation? Are we going to continue to experience these warm, wet winters? Is this part of the challenge we've got, with the new regulations and with the deforestation rules? So that's the question I've got for you guys.
Yeah. Well, I think, I suppose, I'll go with an answer first. I think that people don't think about these pressures, and it's almost, you can say in the last 5 years that it's suddenly come. And I think that when you're making regulations, you're going to have to think about it. But I don't think people do think about it, because I query whether or not you look at things holistically. It's easy to focus on one commodity. And I think my experience in palm would suggest that people try to move into other things, but there are always consequences. They may be good and they may be bad, but there are always consequences. And that is a big message from my experience in palm oil. And that's what I would just think in animal feed. I don't know what Barnaby thinks from a different perspective.
Well, I guess, I'm not going to claim to know exactly what climate change is going to have an impact on UK winters. I've seen a lot of different kind of predictions on that, and one of them is, we know it's getting hotter. Does that mean hotter and wetter? Does that mean hotter and drier? Does that mean we've had, over the last 5 years, we've had extended droughts? We've had, as you just mentioned, Rob, the wettest few months in history, so it's very difficult to predict. I guess that's compounded if you're one of the people who has to grow the crops.
Yeah.
Just on that, and I think you mentioned two things, Barnaby, there. You mentioned drought and you mentioned high rainfall. Mm-hmm. And both of those have a huge impact, and both of them have an impact on the volumes that we feed. So if you take this spring, for instance, we're probably a month, 6 weeks, 2 months late in certain parts of the country where cows are still indoors, where they should be out grazing. Because of the wet weather, it's not because there's no grass to graze, it's the fact that the ground won't carry the cows, and you're destroying your paddocks and your grazing platform for later in the summer. So cows are indoors and they're being fed. Multiple farms are taking extra tonnage to contracts because cows are still being housed.
Yeah.
Then if you flip it to your drought situation, where we run short grass in very hot June, July, August, again, it calls for extra feed. So all these, it's like you mentioned, Judith, about your implications side of things. The deforestation, wetter, warmer winters, drier, hotter summers, all drive more feed into livestock.
And that drives costs, obviously, as well. Yeah. I guess talking of the iron law of unintended consequences, that brings us quite nicely onto some upcoming legislation for both the EU and the UK. What does the UK feed industry think about things like EUDR and UKDD?
Well, where do we start answering this question? And I think if you look back to our conversation before we started recording this, and we were chatting about the couple of events where you attended, and some of the cleverest brains in the farming and feed industry are all in a room together, and only 40% of them can answer exactly what it is, or a minister from DEFRA can only give you a sort of overview of what's going on. I think that probably tells you where the UK feed industry is on this.
Okay. Yeah, so a lot of uncertainty, would it be fair to say?
I think a lot of uncertainty, and I think we, as always, as is natural in people, we've left it to the very last minute. We've continued to kick the can down the road, and now we're really looking for answers quickly. And that's whether you're a feed compounder, whether you're a dairy processor. I think everybody is now at that point where they need information. I think there is information there. I think the shippers and the traders are trying to gather that information. But it's back to your consequences situation. Will one thing fit all?
Yeah. And the EU is, again, there's lots of talk about whether or not that will be delayed. But, I mean, I think the point is that it is actually law. Do you see that the EU might be able to fit across from a UK perspective? So the key differences is that, if you like, the EU is more about the imports going in of these commodities, and the first line of attack, if you like, it's the traders and processors, the people that put it on the market and or sell into Europe, versus the UK due diligence, which looks like it's going to be for everybody that uses the four key commodities, which is cattle, cocoa, soya, and palm oil, whereas obviously the EU is far wider. So just on the EU, how well do you think that the industry is set up for the EU? And your comment about the traders, is it because a lot of those traders are in Europe and bringing most of the material through Europe first?
I think there'll be, and I'm interested to get your views whether the UK will get some benefit almost by default because of EU doing the due diligence, because a lot of commodities would come in through the deep water ports. We have commodities for sure come direct into the UK, but there are a lot of commodities that come in through Europe, and there'll be certain commodities that come into Europe and are partially manufactured in Europe, and then will hit the UK to become finished feed.
Yeah.
So is there going to be some, as I say, some regulation compliance by default there?
I think the answer is I don't know.
Possibly, maybe. Yeah, definitely, maybe.
But I do think it's interesting, again, this whole thing about due diligence. If you've got good information, I suppose that's the other way. If you've got good information from your suppliers, that enables you to do your level of due diligence. So it's got to. I guess the bits for me is there a lot of, say, soya, rape and palm oil coming via Europe? Or do we, what would you say is the percentage from Europe? Just as a guess, what would you say comes through Europe?
I can only really give you accurate figures on the organic, where we would specialise. If you look at the dairy sector of organic, probably uses somewhere between 12 and 15,000 tonnes of organic soya, and I would say probably 80% of that comes direct into the UK from the likes of China and India. We have European soya, we have Eastern European soya. But I would think 80% of that will come direct into the UK via container. Most organic raw materials come by container rather than by bulk cargo. Out of the 360,000 tonnes or whatever's used in conventional dairy, I wouldn't really be able to answer what comes direct and what comes via Europe.
Yeah. It does interest me about soya coming from China. I don't know why. I wouldn't assume that it could be grown there, but it is interesting that organic is coming from China and India, because the whole focus is on South America rather than looking at India and China. And do you think that they will be EU compliant? I mean, they're going to have to be, but have you heard anything that they're doing to be compliant?
I think naturally in organic, we've got better supply chains.
Yeah, better traceability.
And better traceability for two reasons. One, we're dealing with a much smaller overall volume. And two, we are dealing with smaller companies, and things are shipped in specific packages. So traceability is much easier. And if you look at just changing tack slightly, if you look at what is actually achievable, if you look at the palm kernel supply chain from Colombia, that's I don't know if I'm allowed to mention the company that bring it in, but or produce it, but that supply chain is second to none.
You're welcome to mention them. We had someone from said company on the podcast earlier in the series.
I mean, looking at what Debon are used. So if we really drill into it, and if you look at what Debon have done over the last 10, 12 years, and what they've achieved in terms of traceability of an organic, what at one point was viewed as a little bit of a waste product, palm kernel, it was a little bit of a filler, but actually what we've seen develop in the last 3 or 4 years is palm kernel in organic diets become a raw material, and it's in there in its own right because of the quality of it, but B, because of the traceability right back to the individual farms. So it is achievable. I think it's much easier achieved in organic than it is in conventional, just purely due to volumes.
So if we move into the kind of wider picture, how will EUDR and potentially UKDD affect livestock and dairy farmers then? How will it affect them on the ground? What do you think's the impact?
I think the interesting number that we've got, it won't come into play for for UK farmers unless you've got 15,000 cows or more. I think it's a 50 million turnover business before it starts to affect. So for the bulk of farmers, it's not going to affect them on a day-to-day basis. Although I do think, they should be part of this. They should be doing their own they should be asking the questions. I think the only way this can work is if we work from top down and bottom up. So if the farmer is asking his feed supplier, I've got soy, I've got palm in my dairy diets. Can you tell me where it's come from? And, that is starting to happen. I get farmers asking, can you tell me the supply chain of the soya part of my diet? Can you tell me the supply chain of the palm kernel part of my diet? But it's a small percentage. But once farmers are... Sorry, go on. Farmers are asking their feed, because the feed industry is very segregated in terms of if you start with the farmer, the next step up the line is either the compounder manufacturer or there could even be a merchant in the middle of that. And then you once you get to your manufacturer, they're then buying from traders. Some of those traders are also shippers, but some of the traders are buying from shippers, maybe in Europe, and then the shippers are buying from the countries of origin. And initially, it starts with a farmer and it ends with a farmer. And I think it's bottom up, top down that what'll make it work, because once those questions are constantly being asked, somebody's passing them up the chain or somebody's sending the information down. And that's where I see we get to some kind of solution.
So In terms of knowing quite a few farmers and with a basic understanding, I guess, of the dairy industry, margins are fairly tight to on terms of cost is a big priority for these farmers. Do you think there's going to be any impact on price because of EUDR?
There's got to be, because the more complexity you put into that supply chain, the more people it's going to take to get that product to the mill. So somewhere along the line, somebody has got to find that money.
Yeah.
And I suggest it'll be farmers at the bottom, farmers at the top will probably be the hardest hit. Because it'll be, we can't pay as much, or you've got to pay more. Mm-hmm. And I think that probably, that cost needs to be far better shared between, right away from the farmer who's growing the soya or the palm to the farmer in the UK who's using it. We all have to accept our responsibility in this, right the way through to, the processor, the supermarket, and ultimately the general public. It has to all fit together.
Because I guess the sort of cynic in me thinks that with UKDD only applying to, say, the big boys in the industry at this end, does it incentivize potentially the smaller ones buying, not engaging with the process and just buying stuff with lower traceability standards?
I wouldn't agree with that. Okay. I think, as an industry, farmers are proud of what they do and what they produce and the quality of what they produce. And I think some of the smaller farmers would probably have a lot bigger heart on their sleeve than some of the bigger units. So I don't think I wouldn't subscribe to, in all walks of life, there's good and bad. Mm-hmm. And there'll be people who will, adhere rigidly to the standards. There'll be people who will push the boundary. And ultimately, there will be some people who step over it. But that's natural.
Yeah. I guess for me, what people haven't considered is how people would find out what's in animal feed, and you've described how farmers are asking what's in my feed. And I do know, again, that some of the bigger the organic farmers, because of the contracts they have, are already on this journey. Do you think just for the conventional market, it's going to be easy to understand what's in your feed? Especially in the beginning, we were talking about, people can swap for price and, it could happen almost, in a month that they go from one percentage of a commodity to another. Do you think the information is available for the conventional market on feed?
Every single delivery of feed in the UK gets a delivery ticket with it, which it won't have a percentage, but it will have a descending order list of ingredients, what are in that feed. So every delivery, whether you have one a day, one a week, one a month, you will know the makeup of the raw materials, what are in your feed. And we'll have certain farms will be on cheap and cheerful, and it'll be least cost formulation, and their ticket may change every delivery. And you'll have other farmers who are on a different quality, and they're on a specific formulation, and it won't change from day one of the contract till the end of the contract, withstanding any worldwide events that we keep seeing where all of a sudden things can't arrive or, countries are shut down. But, so I think what we see animal feed as just one product. And I think, that's probably where we start and get a little bit, as lay people get confused. If you look at it, with whatever number of feed mills we have in this country, they'll all be producing multitudes of diets, and they may start with dairy diets at 12%, and they may run up to 21%, stepping up in 2% gaps.
It's 21% of
protein.
Right.
And within that, just as you would have with a supermarket, within those ranges of feeds, you will have a good, better, best.
Mm-hmm.
And if you buy a value product out of a supermarket, you expect poorer quality raw materials in there. If you buy the finest product out of a specific supermarket, you expect the best raw materials in that product. And it's exactly the same. So you would have a matrix of probably 5 protein ranges across 3 ranges. So you've probably 15 different products just within each mill for a dairy cow. Then you start to look at supplementary blends, you look at minerals, you look at protected fats, you look at supplements that can go in there. It's a vast array. It's what I would describe as a ball of wool. You every time you find the end, somebody takes it off you and throws it in the corner again.
Mm-hmm. A real challenge for someone looking for traceability then, for full traceability.
Yeah, and that every mill would have its own little formulation, so that it's not there is a standard. This is what the standard is. One mill may be using more wheat because they're in the east of the country. Another mill in the southwest may use more barley. So you'll have those multitude of products which belong to that manufacturer, which will be different across a whole range of mills. It's not a standard 12%, 14%, 16%, 18%. It's much more complex. So traceability is going to be really difficult, and it will come with a lot of cost.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think we're coming towards the end of our time here, but before we finish, what should livestock and dairy farmers be doing now?
Praying for some dry weather.
So as we're recording, it's April, and we've just had, as Rob mentioned, the wettest 6 months in UK history. Is that right?
Yeah. Incredible. It's the wettest spring that I can ever remember, and probably following on a really difficult winter.
Mm-hmm.
So it is difficult. And this is you asked what farmers should be doing. I think they have got a part to play in this, but it's a very small part of a very big picture for a farm.
Yeah.
If we've joked about praying for some dry weather, that farms have got cattle inside what they shouldn't have. They're trying to graze grass. That we're heading for silage time. We're seeing problems around the world with different countries which affect commodities. So where does this fit into that list of priorities is the question I would ask. Should the help be coming from somewhere in that and absorbing some of the cost in that middle proportion? Because if we go back to the theme of farmers at the top and farmers at the bottom, both of those are having, whether you're a grower or whether you're a milk producer or a meat producer or a poultry producer, you've got lots of things, lots of plates to spin.
Yeah, definitely.
Great. Well, I think that's probably a good place to finish. Thank you very much, Rob. And thank you to our listeners for listening to the latest episode of the Sustainable Commodities podcast.
Thank you.